Hello everyone, I'm Courtney Lewis and I'm joined by Tarik O'Regan, a wonderful composer who's written us a brand new piece, Trances, which we're performing this week for the first time. So I realized with horror earlier this week that we've known each other for 20 years. So do you want to give a little bit of background?
Don't say that. 20 years ago, I believe, you were my very serious, if I remember correctly, and very diligent and very good student back in good old Cambridge, England at Clare College.
That's right.
And we were doing history, I think.
20th century history, my favorite.
Yeah. And it's a funny way that the world reunites us.
Isn't it?
But, you know, I mean, obviously I was very young back then, as were you. But it's funny, you know, thinking back to those classes. I remember it was all based around the way that we define things and the way that nomenclature has become super important. You know, what is a serial work? What is you know, an impressionist work or expressionist work? And how the naming of these things sometimes aligns, but often doesn't. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot about, I often think a lot about that when, you know, these days writing music, where I think even in those 20 years, things had begun to change, but I think we're much freer as composers, and I presume as programmers and conductors, artistic directors, to lean away from these very, very fixed senses of what a piece is, under which category it is. So, you know, nowadays I feel, you know, there's just a group of us writing music for the stage, you know, the concert hall, and I think we're much in a very positive way. I think we're liberated actually from, oh, you know, yeah, no, he's an atonal composer. Oh no, this is it's sort of, she is a post-minimalist, you know, and I think we've rid ourselves of that. So yeah, 20 years ago, I think we were in the middle of that period of I think being able to escape the last of, I would suppose, that quite long era of schools.
Of 20th century modernism.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a kind of way you ought to do things, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think a wonderful amount of fantastic music came out of it, and I suspect we lost a lot of great music. I think a lot of people probably left the business. I think there's a lot of music that we just never heard, that's out there that we need to do better to find. And I'm so glad that way of thinking has, in some senses, ended. And it's, you know, it's testament to the work you're doing here, honestly. And obviously I've seen the programming that you're doing here, where I feel it's quite rare in a sense that there's a sense of, you know, this is just part of the fabric of live music. You know, there's not a fetishism around, you know, oh, there's the old work and then there's the new work. I feel that there's, working with you today and working with you over this, you know, with this piece, I just feel like, well, you know, we're putting together a concert of music that we, you know, want to investigate, and I think that's extremely positive, and I think it's rarer than you think. Honestly.
Well, I always believe that, you know, we shouldn't think about new music as something different from everything else.
Absolutely.
This is a single tradition, and that we want to continue it and let it build. Well, talking about music that sort of crosses categories, if you like, or genres, that brings us nicely to your piece, Trances. I wanted to ask you to write a piece because I heard your piece, Rye, a couple of years ago when the Halle was playing, and I was conducting them in Manchester during the same week. And we played that here, some of you might remember, a few weeks ago, which was really wonderful and a great introduction to your style, or this particular part of your style. So I know there's a lot of, there are particular influences that you're investigating in this piece. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, firstly, I should say congratulations on your performance of Rye, which I tuned into on your online streaming. We were having a baby at the precise moment. I wasn't having a baby. My wife was having a baby.
Glad to hear it.
yeah, I can't do everything. But I really enjoyed that. And so, yeah, there are Rai, another work, Charby, and then this work, Trances, are all works for orchestra that are, I suppose, a way for me to think back to my own background, particularly my mother's side of the family. My mother's an Arab from Algeria, and she was born in Morocco, and spent, my family on that side are between Morocco and Algeria. And the result of that is a huge amount of my youth was spent in North Africa, in that part of the world. And it's not that I rejected that part of my background. The other part of my background is Irish. But I mean, at some point, you sort of go through life and things that are just there in a way you don't focus on, because it's just part of the nature of living. So I went to university and really got into the modernist 20th century Western classical music repertoire, and really got involved in that. And I think actually since sort of, in a way, leaving the UK, because I moved to the States to New York in 2003. And it was something about going away from the UK that made me start thinking about who I was as a person, where these backgrounds are in my life. And so I started writing these pieces, really just sort of trying to think, what was all that music I heard in Morocco? What was that music I heard in Algeria? And this is a country where you largely listen, back then certainly, you largely listened to music on tapes in cars. That's how you listen to music. You put a tape in and you'd go driving. I just remember, endlessly, long journeys on bad roads listening to this music. And I think quite early on I was interested in not trying to do an authentic ethnographical research work, where I was sort of trying to go and capture recordings of stuff. I mean, really, I'm interested in memory, and actually the inaccuracies of memory, how something so poignant, and it feels very, very strong if I think back to my family there and the music. It feels so poignant that I feel that I know what this music was. But it's obviously, hazy.
Yeah.
And I think with Trances in particular, it was something it was having rewatched quite recently this documentary by Ahmed Al-Manouni called Trances, which has been restored recently by Martin Scorsese. And it's a documentary based around a Moroccan rock band called Nas El Gouan, of sort of traditional soul folk rock band of the 70s, really. And it was watching that documentary that I knew I'd wanted to write. I'd written Rai, I'd written Charby, and I'd wanted to write a third piece, and this opportunity came up. And it was watching that documentary, which starts off with an amazing sort of, there's 4 or 5 of them, and they all come on drumming. And I suddenly thought, I want to write a piece that's really based around the sort of handheld instruments and the tactile nature of things. And so that's why there's so much of that in this piece. And it's not something that runs all the way through. So there are 4 goblet drums in Trances, which in Morocco we'd call darbukas, but in Greek music and other cultures, they're dumbeks or other names of them. And so, that was a driving force for this piece. I wanted this sort of, to explore this tactile sense, because I think to me it speaks of this sort of distance between the sort of haziness of memory and really wanting to hold on to something. So the piece, Trances, begins and ends with, drumming. And that was definitely an influence from this documentary. And it comes back throughout the piece. It's different to Rai, where there's percussion, all the way through. This is very much more these sort of, the way that memory works is that there's suddenly a moment of clarity and then you're out again. Trying to recall a dream. You've got it, and then you've lost it. And that's very much what the piece is about. And that's why we were talking about this middle movement, which is quite, the piece is in 3 movements. You know, the outer 2 are pretty fast, and the slow movement, there's a sort of glimmer of fast-paced material that echoes the outer movement. And it's really that, what I was trying to do there was this sudden feeling when you know, when a word's on the tip of your tongue, or you suddenly have a smell of something that just takes you back somewhere. And it was that was one of the things I was trying to capture in the piece. So yeah, I mean, that's the sort of where Trances lies in my exploration of that work in general, and specifically, you know, the sort of inspiration for writing it for you and for the Jacksonville Symphony, for which I'm very, very grateful, by the way. It's a terrific opportunity.
So it's 3 movements. We've got that drumming intro in the first movement, and then a pretty fast movement that's in 5.
Yes.
And it's funny, isn't it? Something as simple as being in 5. It's funny how it still can be really treacherous and uncomfortable for us to do a whole movement in 5. And what I love in that piece is that the material kind of appears out of nowhere in this kind of haze of lots of soft instruments, and then a little pattern in the marimba and solo viola that kind of then influences everybody. But is that a particular characteristic of Moroccan and Algerian music, that 5 rhythm, or is that?
There's certainly in, I think it's Gnawa music, there's irregular rhythms. But what I would say is characteristic is things seemingly coming out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And actually across the African continent, there's a tremendous variety of music and a tremendous variety of cultures. But one thing that I think is consistent, and you can hear this in music in Ghana or Kenya or in music of South Africa, is the way that something very gradually shifts. And if I were to play you the beginning of the sequence and I was to play you 5 minutes later, it would be clearly very different material. But the transition is so subtle. And in that sense, it speaks to my ear, it speaks to, for example, chromaticism in Bach. You could pull out a moment of Bach that is deeply dissonant, yet he leads you through his counterpoint, that it all feels extremely natural. And of course, where we really do hear that in, I think there is not a reckoning to be had, but I think a lot of the American minimalist composers, looked at a lot of that music from the African continent. And I'm not saying that it's plagiarized or copied, but that subtle shifting, which is so much a part of American music, minimalist music, if you want to call it that, from the 1960s onwards, I think owes a lot to that very subtle way in which things seem to come out of nowhere. And that is very much something I remember. And also, it's this double issue of, do I remember it accurately? Probably not. But, it's this haze around it that I enjoy.
And then we have a second movement, which is slow and sort of feels like a more nocturnal kind of atmosphere. And then the finale, which I really love. And I mean, that's the one where I think it's very clear that you're coming from a European modernist tradition. Yeah. Because, it's very Sibelius-y, some of the way the blocks of harmony, like icebergs that are hitting each other, and who's going to win in the end between these sort of different areas. But also, of course, it has that same shifting rhythm as well, with the repeated note that there's a middle C that's played pretty much the whole way through, apart from a couple of places. But within those bars of 4, there are these very strange accents and little cannons going on between the first and the second violins. And it's very intricate and detailed, the way that works.
Yeah, I think in that piece, I was thinking of, in a very basic way, if you think of sort of, melody and harmony and rhythm as a sort of X and Y axis of music. I was interested in going down the Z axis as sort of a third dimension. It was really about texture and depth. And in that regard, to explore that, I felt I had to simplify the X and Y. I'm saying it's not simple. I know it's very difficult to conduct and work through. And but to sort of simplify the X and Y material. So yes, this sort of underpinning. I'm sure if you did a piano reduction of that movement, it would look very bizarre. Basically just lots of 16s of C natural.
Yeah.
But really, it's all the stuff that a piano reduction can't capture,
Right.
which is the wonderful thing about working with an orchestra like this. You know, you're pushing this third dimension. It's suddenly you're going into 3D,
Yeah.
and that to me again is this looking back and sort of being able to sort of focus and pull it in and out with accenting, and the way that accenting can create sub tempos that you can feel things are squeezing up and slowing down, which you all do brilliantly. And yeah, I mean that and I think I wanted to sort of explore that and also have this ending that is, as I said, I think as I said, sort of somewhat wistful in a way.
Yeah.
That it doesn't. It's I want to give the game away, but it's not. There's a sense that there's an overhang on it. And I think there's also, there's certainly, what I love about rock musicians and bands in general is, if you were interviewing me as a member of a band, I'd be telling you about all the other bands and all the other musicians that I love, and I wanted a bit of that and a bit of that. And classical musicians are so nervous of that. We're so nervous of saying what our influences are. But the other part of it is certainly in that second movement, there's an Americanness, a sort of a Copelandy pull to it that I think honestly speaks to being an immigrant, to the United States. And there's something that's so strong in my heart of encountering that music for the first time when I was back in the UK, and I was like, why does this sound American? How on earth did this composer, so late in the game of music to be written, capture something new that feels so so entwined with a national identity? And so there's certainly a part of that in that second movement as well. And I think. So there's a ton of influences in the work, and I think it, more or less sums up, life, my life, living here as a Brit, naturalized American citizen now, with my kids are now born American, and with this sort of quite strange background of different heritages in my own family, and I think it's just. When someone says, when people hear my name and say, "What are you? Who are you?" I thought, well, I now feel like I have a piece. I can say, well, more or less, this sums up.
Yeah. Well, I think that's wonderful. That's one of the things that's so nice about the piece is that it's so authentically who you are.
Yeah.
And I think that goes back to what we were saying at the beginning, that sometimes when we're in college or we're in an academic environment, we're a little bit afraid of being vulnerable like that. And certainly for me as well, leaving the UK has been the thing that kind of catalyzed realizing who I was in so many different ways. Yeah. What you're saying about the piano reduction is really interesting, because of course that's the way I learnt the piece, hammering away on the piano. Because you think about it, there's no recording of this piece, just the score arrives and you just have to put on the metronome and kind of hack away at it.
Oh my gosh.
But yesterday, when we played it through for the first time, it was so exciting to hear the piece. It was so much more beautiful than I was expecting.
Yeah.
Thank you. So just because I knew all that, what the notes were going to be, but it just real people and good instruments and the whole. So it's been a really tremendously exciting experience, and we're really looking forward to the first performances this weekend. Me too. It's been a joy to be with you this week, and it's just exciting to see the rehearsal process as well, just how it begins to grow. And there's always a magic in the type of music we do, which is that there's something, and this is when the magic happens, I think. There's something that happens, it's sort of like a relay. There's nothing that's now going to change in the score, and it's fixed, but there's something that's going to continue growing. Yeah. The note, nothing's going to change. None of these notes are going to change. Yeah. And it will grow, and you're doing, more than one performance of it, and it will be different. Yeah. And, that is, truly the magic that sits somewhere off the page in the ether, and it's a joy to be here sharing that with you. Thank you. Well, we hope that you'll come and share it with us as well, Friday night and Saturday night at Jacksonville Symphony Hall. Looking forward to seeing you there.